Whoops, LinkedIn says you're not approved. Okay, you're right.
All right.
We are live on we're live on YouTube though.
All right. Hello everyone.
Okay, so let's try this out. What do we like to do, John, at 2 a.m. Central Time?
2 a.m. Central Time?
We like to talk about the Dream 100. And but that keeps me up at night actually. So I wanted to talk about why you think, what is the Dream 100 and why it's so important and why we emphasize it.
Sure. Well, for anyone, any business, really, anyone who's engaged in business, there's at least 50 to 100 people. 100's a nice round number, but there's at least 50 to 100 people that are going to be the most important people to that business. And I think a lot of people don't put enough effort and energy into cultivating those people, thinking through who are they. That's a big piece of it. And then following through on actually building that relationship. So the Dream 100 is an idea that we've been talking about. Others, we're not the first one to talk about the idea of a Dream 100. There have been many others who've talked about it, Dream 500, different numbers, but the general principle, the general concept is who are the most important people for your business. And we have our own methodology around how to cultivate, how to come up with that list.
Yeah. And people think it's, the funny thing is your Dream 100, they go straight to business, and it could be personal relationships as well. What I like to talk about, and you do, is not just your best, business relationships, but your champions. Who's out there always championing you, whether it's business or personal.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there are, and I think oftentimes we forget about those people. You've heard me tell this story many times before, but when I was practicing law for many years, I would keep very close track of who referred business to me. And I remember looking back at one point of who'd referred business to me. And there was one real estate agent who had referred multiple clients to me over a period of a couple of years. And then she hadn't referred me anything in like 9 months or a year. And I look back at my email and I realized I hadn't communicated with this person in like 9 months. One of my top referral partners, and great, like really smart, John, don't even communicate with that person. So,
you say that and it's funny. And the thing is, especially people are prone to referring. Like you and I are prone to referring. We probably send 10 to 20 email introductions daily. Okay, daily. And I tell people this, I go, if you email me or text me or call me, you're immediately top of mind for me. And I want to refer you to someone because that's my nature. I just refer people. So if you email me, hey, Jeremy, how's it going? I'm thinking, who should I refer to this person? That's just how I think, right? And so the people who are prone to referring, you just want to stay top of mind, right? So if you're out there and you haven't emailed me in a while, email me because you'll be top of mind. I mean, there's one person I was talking to today, and I probably sent him 9 introductions today. I'm not exaggerating, 9 introductions, and I'm flooded his email with introductions that he wanted. So they're double opt-in introductions. I asked him ahead of time. I asked the people ahead of time. It takes a little bit of work. So I was probably half his inbox today, but high level introductions. So
I think what we were going to get to in this discussion, and I think what a lot of people could use help with, because we hear that people struggle with this, is who are the most important people to me, right? Like who are the people that I should be thinking about, and how do I figure out those people? Or if a lot of people they'll say, well, who refers me? It's my clients, my current clients. But there's often a lot of low-hanging fruit. There are other people out there that maybe could be more of a champion of you if you followed through on finding these high leverage type of people or organizations or companies or that sort of thing. So
there's 6 things really that when we go over with people this Dream 100 blueprint. And so I wanted you and me to share some of those. There's 6 aspects that we go through that we find that are important to map out almost like a year's plan. And when I was talking to someone earlier today, we say it's for a podcast, like a Dream 100 Blueprint for your podcast. Since, Rise25, you can check out rise25.com and see what we do. But we help people run and launch their podcast and get ROI doing it. But I said, it's masked as a podcast, but it's really a year's plan for your business.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and earlier today, I was talking with a business, and, I practiced law for many years, and I told them there are two major causes, and I was a litigator, so I help people file lawsuits, defend lawsuits. And there are two major areas in which cause problems, which lead to litigation. And they are relationships and communication, breakdowns in relationship and breakdowns in communication. And if you can nail those two things, if you can get those two things right, your business is going to be much better off. And ultimately, what we do now is really about helping people to build stronger relationships and helping people to communicate effectively with those relationships and with people beyond that. And that is so critical in business. So really, it's a much larger challenge for most businesses, and prerogative as well for every business. You need to build great relationships and you need to communicate effectively with many people at once. And that's what a podcast can do.
So let's just go through briefly some of the 6 aspects we go through in what we call our Dream 100 Blueprint session, to map out a year's worth of their business and podcast.
Sure. And so number one, the thing I always say to people is, look, when people start thinking about starting a podcast, they spend 6 hours researching this thing right here, the microphone, and they spend hours and hours fretting.
What software should I use?
What software should I use? How to get downloads? How to get subscribers? How to get people to listen to it? How to get people to say yes to be a guest on my podcast? Yeah. These are the types of questions we hear people asking.
And shout out, to GKIC and Nick there had me on his podcast. And, I don't remember, it was an hour-long podcast. And I said, let me answer that for you in your guest for 30 seconds. Okay. Get a Blue Yeti, get an ATR 2100, less than $100, and use Zoom. Okay, yeah, end of conversation.
Right, exactly.
Now you can stop worrying about that.
Now let's move on to bigger issues.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny because there are, I think of different podcasting experts who I've followed over the years who their whole business is on equipment recommendations. We're like, okay, here's your recommendation. Let's move on. Let's tackle the bigger issues. And really it starts with number one, the first piece is, who are your best referral partners? Who are your best strategic partners? Who are your best clients, both prospective clients and actual or past clients or current clients? And that's really what's most important, because those are the people that you should be deepening a relationship with through a podcast. That's going to lead to more business.
Yeah. And, some of the people I know and love, Brian Kurtz, John Rulin, Dan Cashel, they believe that relationships are key, right? So if my mentors and friends who I most respect really hold, like you were saying earlier, relationships very dearly. So how do you deepen the relationships with your best, how do you deepen those relationships even further?
Right. And to borrow a Dan Cashel word that he loves using, edify them, right? It edifies people by featuring them on a podcast. And you don't actually have to have a ginormous audience in order to do this. You can do it even without a huge audience, but just the fact of taking interest in people, taking the time to interview them, is actually an act of generosity for people. Yeah. So that's the first piece, is thinking through those.
Huge. That's a huge foundational piece. Mm-hmm. Who are the people and, partners, clients you should be profiling?
Right. And, oftentimes we all have low-hanging fruit. We have certain relationships we haven't really thought about, like the real estate agent that I mentioned earlier. But it could be a strategic partnership relationship of some sort. It could be a business or a consulting firm, in a consulting agency in your industry. I often say to people like this, think about who out there serves the same clientele as you, but is not competitive with what you do. And if you were to come in and serve their client, you would make their life easier. You would make their life easier because you would make that client more successful which would in turn make their life easier because their client's more successful, their client is thriving, their client is going to have them stick around longer. That's one way of thinking about it.
Yeah. So that's one piece, right? And the second is thought leadership and content.
So we're big believers that in addition to one of the biggest really values of doing a podcast is you get to up-level your network. You get access to the brightest minds out there, and you get to ask them questions around your own curiosity. And that's an amazing responsibility. It's an amazing opportunity. Some of the best insights I've had for my businesses, your business, our business has been from this process, from interviewing people. But in addition to that, you also have an opportunity to share your own thought leadership. And we all have expertise. And so, you can create episodes which are designed to share that, to highlight that expertise. But then the further question is, what types of episodes should you create? What kinds of content should you create? And you can create content which will speed up the process for your clients, their process of building trust with you, the process of getting their questions answered so that they overcome those hurdles so that they're willing to buy from you.
I mean, John, just like we did, right? So instead of people coming right now, if they've listened to this, they come to us with what mic should I buy? What software should I use? We already answered that question for them. So now we can get deeper. We can get deeper into the conversation of how does this serve their business and their life?
Right.
So we can get past some of those initial questions and answer them for them in a very quick fashion. So they're appreciative of that. Right. So number 3 is, how do you build an audience and reach out to high profile guests? Because one of our principles, right, we have the ROI filter. Mm-hmm. We have, the best use of your time, right? Using the best use of your time. And how do you give to people?
Right. Okay? And we should explain. So the ROI filter is just kind of a shorthand that we came up with because we realized that when it comes to creating a podcast, and you and I, between the two of us, have about 18, 19 years experience with podcasts, doing podcasts. And it is a big blank canvas. When it comes to creating a podcast, there's virtually an unlimited number of things that you can do. Now that can be paralyzing and it can be debilitating because it means that you can layer in complexity after complexity. And so what we said as a commitment is that we have to put it through an ROI filter because the thing is with the podcast is unless you get return from it, return for your efforts, unless you get ROI, your days are numbered. Over 10 years of doing this, we've seen so many great people and businesses that have started a podcast. They've done it. They've maybe gotten 3 months in, 6 months in, 12 months in, whatever. And then they hit a wall and they realize they're not getting any return for it. And they put it on hiatus or whatever you want to call it, but they never get back to it again. And if you really dig beneath the surface and you ask that person, why'd you stop? Why are you not doing that anymore? You seem to really enjoy it. It seemed like it was going so great. You were boasting about download numbers. Ultimately, the reason that they stopped doing it is because they weren't getting return. They weren't getting ROI. So that's why we put everything through the ROI filter because it's critical. You must get ROI in order to do it sustainably and profitably for the long term.
Yeah. And so it goes with building authority, reaching out to high profile guests. And also we usually go through specific templates and scripts that you can use to reach out to people in a really nice, eloquent fashion. Right. And people saying yes.
Right. And that's a big one that people struggle with. What do I say? How do I reach out to, maybe
someone I have no downloads? I have no episodes. How do I reach out to someone?
Right. And the truth is, well, for one, as far as the download piece goes, about half of the downloads out there come through Apple Podcasts. Apple doesn't release its download numbers. So it's kind of a big black box. There isn't transparency the way that other social platforms have transparency, at least in terms of downloads. So there's that. And then also downloads are really just a substitute of it's kind of a validator. It's a social proof indicator to indicate that you are you have authority, you have stature, that it's not just something that was a fly-by-night operation kind of thing. And you can achieve that in
That's
other
really the
ways.
question people ask is,
Right.
what's the social proof? Are you legit?
And you can achieve that in other ways. It doesn't have to be with downloads. Oftentimes we're talking to people that have got 20 years of experience in their industry. They've got tremendous amounts of experience. Maybe they've written for impressive publications. Maybe they've taught at impressive schools. Maybe they've served impressive clientele. All of those things can substitute as a social proof element to say to the world that you are legit and that you're worth talking to when it comes to being a guest on
And
your
that's
show.
really the question. If you're getting, how many downloads do you have when you reach out to a guest? Well, you haven't provided enough social proof.
Exactly.
Because usually if you do, they're not going to ask you about downloads just as one metric, unless it's a PR person. For some reason, a lot of PR people will ask, how many downloads do you have? But besides that, you're exactly right. The social proof elements. And so that's number 3. And again, we've developed these specific scripts and templates. We did a session, the Dream 100 Blueprint, with a agency that does email copywriting for e-commerce. And they said, I would have just paid you just for these email templates. That's it. Like, those email templates you created are super valuable.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've honed them over 10 years, so they've gotten pretty good.
The 4th is the interview template that we go over. We go over, they're not scripted questions, but there's a bunch of questions that we find elicit the best stories. So what are the best practices for conducting an actual interview? Because there's an art and science to conducting the interview and drawing the best content out of your guests. So we want to shortcut that process.
Right. And, one mistake that I see people make is they don't actually bring enough of themselves to the interview, and they don't weave in enough of their own expertise, because ultimately we often say that podcasting it's relationship building, it's networking, it's business development. So you're building a relationship with the person on the other end of the microphone. And some people who don't podcast successfully, they don't bring enough of themselves into that conversation. The ones who do a really good job of it actually weave in their own stories and expertise, not to take the spotlight away from the guest. I still believe that should be the case, but they weave it in and then they pivot it into a question about the guest. And I think that's
and people want to know a little bit more about the person asking the question. I am, by the way, totally guilty of this. I probably don't weave in as much of my expertise throughout the interviews.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and I feel the same way. I definitely feel that I could do it more. But yeah, so that's one of the pieces for the Dream 100 process is actually discussing that, because that's a big piece. The 5th piece then is tools and software recommendation. Now, what discussion of creating a podcast would leave out talking about tools and software? But as we said earlier, as we alluded to earlier, it's a short discussion.
Yeah.
ATR Audio Technica ATR 2100. I've been using this thing for about 10 years now. It's been doing great. This thing keeps working, but the newer MacBooks, which I just got a new one a couple of months ago, now you got to have new connectors because they don't have USB ports in them anymore. But the microphone's still working just fine. And, as far as software goes, I mean, I use Skype for many years.
Yeah.
Zoom has kind of replaced Skype. And so I use Zoom now.
We always tell people to use what you're already using. Like, you're already using probably tools to meet with people and record. Some people use Zoom. So just use Zoom, whatever's easiest. Use Uber Conference, use Skype. I use Skype Ecamm with Ecamm Call Recorder. Those guys are geniuses, by the way, who invented Ecamm Call Recorder. They have Ecamm Live. They have a bunch of other software, but it's so seamless. So whatever you're used to using, you want to make it easy on you. You also want to make it easy on your guest coming on to use as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And as far as that, sometimes people will say, well, what's the best call quality, or what's the best audio quality? And look, I don't know anyone.
That question 3 times.
Yeah.
Today.
I mean, it's funny. I mean, I've seen people like post in forums and things like that. They're like, you know what, guys, I've been doing my podcast for a year. It's not going that well. I think I need to buy a new microphone. And I'm like, no.
That will solve all your problems.
That's not the problem. No one ever quit doing a podcast because their audio quality wasn't good enough. I mean, sure, you need to have like a baseline, a good enough audio quality, but beyond that, it's not that big a deal. And I think that any of these tools we're talking about here, recording software and microphones and stuff like that are perfectly fine.
Yeah. I mean, 10 years ago when we started doing this, Zoom didn't exist. So, we use what we could use. I got a Mac just because I wanted to use eCam call recorder with Skype because the files were too big for my Dell and I could not use the Dell for recording for that. So now it's a lot easier. So it's good. Yeah. And so that's the tools and software, short conversation. Number 6, which is people's favorite conversation, which is...
Yeah. So what we found is that a lot of people, they kind of dropped the ball with doing the podcast where, it's an amazing dance because I've done hundreds, and you have as well, hundreds of interviews. And if you do it right, if you've selected the right guest, if you have bond and rapport, if you have a great conversation, if you clicked in some way, if you've talked about topics and subject matter that interests you and that engages you, both of you, and you have that connection, and then you get to the end of the process and then boom, you're out of time, And so what we found is that a lot of times people don't do a great job of then taking that conversation into, hey, what else can we do together? How can we collaborate? What else? Where can we take this relationship? Because oftentimes there are other opportunities, and it might mean that one of us becomes a client of each other, one way or the other. There are various different ways in which you can collaborate. And so over 10 years of doing this, we've developed 7 different strategies that you need to use in order to take that guest from being a guest into becoming something else, a collaborative partner, a referral partner where you refer to one another, a client of yours. Maybe they're a client for you. Maybe you hire them. There are different ways in which you could collaborate, but a lot of people drop the ball on that last piece. And so it's important to think about that last piece and what's the next possible iteration on your relationship.
And the overall part of those 7 things, which we reverse engineer because you and I, we do some of this stuff naturally. The overarching theme of it is you just give as much as humanly possible to someone. All of the elements of those things is basically you giving as much as possible. And funny thing is not necessarily expecting anything in return.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's a hard thing to do, just give, not expect. If nothing comes back to you, that's not the point of it. The point is just to give, and that's it. So that kind of wraps up the conversation. We feel like the foundation is the Dream 100 Blueprint session. And those are some of the things we find to be have been the most impactful for us over the past 10 years and what we go over with clients and friends and people. So if you have questions about the process or anything at all about podcasting, you can email us support@rise25media.com or go to rise25.com and check out the video and John and I's sense of humor in that video on how you monetize the podcast.
One final thought. I mean, I think back, when I first got into podcasting, I feel like I kind of rushed into it. I didn't really think it through, and it took me a few years to figure that out. And, these days it's so competitive, it's so cutthroat that a lot of people don't make it that far. I think you call me, foolhardy or whatever, determined or persistent, but I just was like, I'm going to figure this thing out. I almost gave it up. And about 5 years ago, around the time you and I became business partners, I was too stuck in the weeds and I only put out 7 episodes. And you came along and said, we need to streamline this whole thing, which you did. And the very next year, I put out 52 episodes, 1 per week. You can think about the difference that made. It made a phenomenal difference. And so, I think that I'm so glad now that we've created this process for people, because if you're serious about it, if you've got a B2B business and you have heard about podcasting, you've thought about maybe doing a podcast one day yourself. And if you want to do it profitably so that you can do it sustainably and for the long term, then I think these 6 different principles that we talked about are critical. You have to think them through. Don't make the mistake that I did, or the mistake that, I don't know about you, I can't speak for yourself, but certainly
I've made a million mistakes
that I made, which was just
I continue to make mistakes.
Which was just like thinking about, the microphone and the recording software and stopping right there, and then be like, oh, I'll figure out all the rest, like who I'm going to interview, the rest of the, as I go along. That's really a waste of your time these days, and it's so gratifying to be able to accelerate the process for people and help them to get to a point of profitability, oftentimes even before you launch, which is what's really rewarding, is seeing people get clients and referrals and strategic partnerships even before that podcast is out the door, which is really cool. So thank you, Jeremy, for leading this discussion. It was great.
Thank you. Check out rise25.com.
All right. Thanks, everyone.